MirrorMask is a 2005 fantasy film directed by Dave McKean and written by Neil Gaiman. Helena works for her family at the circus. She refuses to perform, angering her mother. Helena's mother must have an operation which complicates the daughter's feelings for her. One night, Helena awakes in a fantasy world. She meets Valentine, a performer and juggler. Helena and Valentine discover that the Dark Queen of this world is searching for her daughter, who looks just like Helena. In the real world, a doppelganger has taken Helena's place, presumed to be the Queen's daughter. The Dark Queen wants to control Helena, a replacement for her daughter. Helena and Valentine search for the MirrorMask, a charm that allowed the doppelganger to take Helena's place in the real world. They switch places, the Dark Queen may or may not have learned to treat her real daughter better, and Helena's mother comes through the operation safely. Helena meets a young man who speaks and behaves exactly like Valentine, but does not recall being Valentine, leaving the narrative ambiguous as to whether or not Helena's experiences were all a dream.
Does everyone around here have a mask?
Of course. How do you know if you're happy or sad without a mask? Or angry? Or ready for dessert?
I've got a face.
Mostly due to the times in which they were written, classic fairy tales contain old-world values. Little Red Riding Hood, for example, should stay on the right path to her grandmother, her family, lest she be overtaken by the violent, even sexual advances of the wolf. Guard your virginity, listen to your parents. Modern reimaginings of fairy tales, particularly those from the Disney Renaissance up until today, challenge old-world values, maybe too G-rated and too gently to be subversive, but at least transgressive. The most common transgressive element is the denial of parental authority and old customs. In The Little Mermaid, Ariel's father, King Triton, objects to his daughter's love interest, and Ariel is at least narratively proven right in the end. Jasmine rejects her father's insistence that she follow the old law of arranged marriages. Mulan shreds antiquated gender roles and saves China. Post-Renaissance, Rapunzel not only doesn't trust her mother, but the parental figure is actively working against her. Merida refuses to marry based on her parents' wishes as well, but Pixar's transgressive fairy tale takes a mature tact and acknowledges that Merida is correct in wanting to choose her own path, but sympathetic to her mother as well. Transgressive retellings are appealing. And so it is not too surprising that in MirrorMask, a modern fairy tale with no centuries-old source material, Helena is fighting against what she believes to be the oppression of her mother's watchful eye and control. In the beginning of the film, her mother insists that she come perform, but Helena, no longer a child, does not want to be part of the circus anymore. She threatens to leave, and following this, her mother becomes ill. This shows Helena's struggle with parental supervision, particularly her own mother. The Sphinxes represent Helena's lack of control. They appear, get in Helena's way, demand answers to riddles. These Sphinxes represent controlling people in her life, like her parents or the doctors. In the same way the Sphinxes will not give Helena freedom, her parents will not give her freedom. The Dark Queen is how Helena sometimes pictures her own mother. Towards the end, Helena, mistaken for the Dark Queen's daughter, tells the Queen that she needs to love her daughter but not possess her. MirrorMask's transgressive fairy tale has the most in common thematically with Brave, as both films are less about rejecting parents and more about teaching both mother and daughter how to have a stable, healthy relationship. In this, MirrorMask is a very mature fairy tale.
She's not a pet! She's not even a child anymore!
Helena does not vanquish her mother like in Tangled. She makes peace with her. Helena does not run away, she's still not old enough to live on her own. Fantasy and fairy tales often traffic in using dreams as methods of transport, of transition, into the allegory of the mind. In The Wizard of Oz, the movie, not the books that depict a more factual Oz, Dorothy's desire to leave home is given shape as a mythical world. Her friends recast as aspects of her personality, things she needs to grow up, like intelligence, courage, and kindness. This psychological and allegorical interpretation of fairy tales reoccurs in MirrorMask, as Helena's fantasy world may or may not have existed, but definitely taught her something and allowed her to grow up. In his book, The Uses of Enchantment, Bruno Bettelheim expounded on this. The unrealistic nature of these tales, which narrow-minded rationalists object to, is an important device because it makes obvious that the fairy tale's concern is not useful information about the external world, but the inner process taking place in an individual. The child intuitively comprehends that although these stories are unreal, they are not untrue. Helena is forced to cope with her mother's pending operation, and she does this by escaping into her fantasy world. The doppelganger's actions give her insight into her own behavior. The MirrorMask acts as a kind of portal between the conscious and unconscious worlds, as well as a charm, a tool for controlling what is called the shadow. In Jungian psychology, which admittedly is no longer the height of psychiatry, the shadow refers to aspects of oneself that are hidden in the unconscious. This shadow can surface and cause uncharacteristic behavior either in the short term or long term. Jung once said, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real." This act is the essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge. In the film, we see that these shadows, physical shadows, not figurative or psychological shadows, are slowly devouring the fantasy world. There is no more balance, and without balance there is chaos. The doppelganger, this shadow, does not only physically resemble Helena. For everything that she is, the shadow is the opposite. Helena creates art. The shadow destroys it. Helena's moral challenge is not simply defeating the shadow, but rather absorbing it, owning it, and being conscious of how it affects her behavior, like, say, lashing out against her mother. In psychology, the shadow is not so much the enemy as it is part of oneself. It cannot be vanquished, but a truce can be reached, much like Helena reaches one with her mother at the end of the film. The White Queen represents Helena's desire to protect her sick mother, and the Black Queen is Helena's fear of being subservient to her. Helena's search is inward, a search of discovery, self-discovery. Everyone in the fantasy world wears masks, but she does not. She shows herself. Valentine asks Helena, "How do you know if you're happy or sad without a mask?" Helena's life in the real world is full of masks. Not just tangible masks in the circus, but the feeling of having to be phony to the audience, to pretend to be happy to her parents. Always the performer, in one way or another. Not having a life outside the circus or real friends. The MirrorMask is different. It forces the shadow to look at itself. When the real Helena, the self, the ego, wears the MirrorMask, the shadow is kept within the shadow world. And when the shadow Helena wears it, the ego Helena is trapped. This disharmony is unacceptable and makes both the shadow Helena and the ego Helena miserable. A compromise between the conscious and unconscious must be made, and they do, and Helena is better for it in the end. Marie-Louise von Franz, a Jungian psychoanalyst, wrote that fairy tales help one understand the collective unconscious, a Jungian concept that is often said to be more spiritual than scientific. According to her, unlike myths, fairy tales are not layered with cultural, national, or religious meaning. She said, "Fairy tales are the purest and simplest expression of collective unconscious psychic processes. Every fairy tale is a relatively closed system, compounding one essential psychological meaning, which is expressed in a series of symbolic pictures and events and is discoverable in these." MirrorMask draws upon other fairy tales like Sleeping Beauty in this scene, but it creates a mythos all its own. A world of masks, both literal and figurative, of real and unreal, of light and shadow. Hi everyone, if you like what I do, consider clicking on the orange Patreon link below. That's how this show happens. It's also a way for you to request an episode, so check it out.